In the heart of Ireland, on the hill of Tara, stands a sacred stone, the Lia Foel, the stone of destiny. For centuries, it crowned kings, but legends say that it was brought from another world. And strangely, it looks just like the shivling of India. Coincidence or a relic of a forgotten migration? Irish myths speak of goddess named Danu, mother of divine. Tuta de Danan. Yet, in the Rig Veda of ancient India, written thousands of years earlier, another goddess appears with the same name, Danu, the mother of Danavas. How can two cultures separated by oceans share the same goddess? Did the Celts inherit their myths from India? And it doesn't stop here. The Celts carved spirals, swastika, and solar wheels into stone monuments older than the pyramids. The very same symbol found in Vedic temples half a world away. Their myths speak of thunder gods with lightning weapons, divine chariots, reincarnations, and cosmic battles. The same theme that resembles the Rig Veda. So, how is this possible? Officially, history tells us that the Celts were purely European. But what if that's not the full story? Ancient DNA, sacred myths, and hidden artifacts hint at something far bigger. A migration out of India that carried the wisdom of the Vedas into Europe. But why do mainstream scholars resist this theory? What secrets lie buried under sites like Newgrange and Tara Hill? And could the Celts really be the lost cousins of the Vedic people? In this video, we uncover the mysteries of the Celts, the resemblance with Rig Veda, and the battle between history and hidden history. Stay tuned, because what you're about to discover will change how you see both Ireland and India forever. Across the heart of Europe, more than 3,000 years ago, mysterious people began to rise. They were not an empire. They left behind no single capital, no unified kingdom, and yet their presence spread across a continent. They were the Celts, one of Europe's most enigmatic civilization. Our story begins in the mountains of Austria, around 1200 BC. Here, deep in the salt mines of Hallstatt, the earliest trace of Celt culture takes shape. Salt was their treasure, preserving food, fueling trade, and attracting wealth. The Hallstatt people mastered metalwork, crafting weapons, ornaments, and tools that spoke of both artistry and power. Centuries later, this culture blossomed into what we call Latine, centered in the lakes and valleys of Switzerland around 450 BC. Latine art was unlike anything Europe had ever seen before. Swirling patterns, intricate jewelry, swords and shields that seemed as much ritual objects as weapons. It was here that Celt identity truly flourished. From here, the Celts started spreading outwards, tribes and clans moving like rivers through the landscape of Europe. They settled Gaul, they reached into Iberia, they sailed across the seas to Britain and Ireland. At their height, Celtic influence stretched from Atlantic Ocean to the edge of Anatolia. And yet, for all their reach, the Celts never built an empire. They were not Rome, they were not Greece. Instead, they remained a web of tribes, loosely connected, fiercely independent, but bound by a common language, shared art, and a worldview carved into stone and memory. This was the Celtic world, vast, diverse, and mysterious. A civilization without borders, carried not by emperors, but by stories, symbol, and spirit. Celtic society was structured but not central. At the top stood the Druids, priests, philosophers, and judges. They were responsible for law, ritual, education, and astronomy. Roman accounts say that a Druid's training took up to 20 years, all preserved through memory rather than writing. Beneath them were the warriors. They formed the noble class, known for their skill in battle and their elaborate weaponry. Many were buried with chariots, swords, and ornaments that symbolized both status and identity. The artisans were equally important. They produced the intricate metalwork, jewelry, and symbolic design that defined Celtic culture, swirling patterns, animal forms, and solar symbols. The Celts placed immense value on oral tradition. They wrote little, preferring to pass knowledge through memorization and recitation. That's why the most we know about them comes from outside sources, especially Roman and Greek writers. Julius Caesar noticed that the Druids taught the immortality of the soul and the doctrine of rebirth. Strabo compared them to India's Brahmins and Persia's Magi. These accounts show that even to their contemporaries, the Celts appeared as a people deeply rooted in spiritual and philosophical traditions. What survives of the world is fragmentary, but even in fragments, we see a society defined by memory, artistry, and belief. Among the Celts, monuments and symbols reveal a deep concern with the cosmos, kingship, and the cycle of time. The most famous site is in Newgrange in Ireland, built around 3200 BC. It is older than the Stonehenge and the pyramids. The passage is aligned so that on a winter solstice, sunlight floods directly into the inner chamber. This design required precise astronomical knowledge, showing that the Celt ancestors tracked the movement of the sun with accuracy. The stones of Newgrange and other sites are carved with spirals and concentric circles. Scholars interpret these as symbols of cycles of the sun, the moon, and the endless rhythm of life and death. These are not random decorations, but a visual language of time and renewal. On the hill of Tara, Ireland's ancient seat of kingship, stands the Liafoel, the stone of destiny. Legend held that when a rightful king will touch it, the stone would roar. Archaeology also reveals a vast wooden temple once stood beneath the site, indicating that Tara was more than a political center. It was a ceremonial heart of Ireland. Symbols recur across Celtic sites. The swastika, associated with the sun, appears on swords and jewelry. The solar wheel represents the turning of the seasons. The triskelion, with its 3 interlocking spirals, symbolizes motion, cycles, and eternal continuity. Each of these signs show a cultural thinking in cosmic terms, linking the human world to the sky world. Through their monuments and symbols, the Celts demonstrated not only craftsmanship, but a worldview. The society, kingship, the cosmos were inseparably connected. Celtic ritual life revolved around fire, the seasons, and the passage into the other world. 2 main festivals marked their year. Samhain, at the end of harvest, was believed to be the time when the barrier between the living and the dead was thinnest. Beltane, in spring, was a fire festival where great bonfires were lit to protect cattle and ensure fertility. Both reveal a society that measured time through cycles of death and renewal. Fire itself held sacred importance. Bonfires were lit on hilltops, sometimes with cattle driven between them for purification. In the Celtic region, fire was not only practical, it was a symbol of transformation and protection. Burial customs show how status and belief were expressed. Nobles were sometimes interred in chariot burials, accompanied by horses, weapons, and ornaments. These burials suggest both a warrior elite and a belief that life continued beyond death, with the chariot serving as transport to the other world. Celtic metalwork was advanced and symbolic. Weapons, jewelry, and ritual objects were crafted with intricate designs and often deposited in rivers or bogs as offering. This shows a worldview where art, technology, and religion were inseparable. Together, these practices, the festivals, fire rituals, chariot burials, and metallurgy, illustrate a culture where daily life was bound to rituals and every act was charged with symbolic meaning. Celtic culture was not only about monuments and rituals. At its heart, it was a world of myths, gods, and origin stories that shaped how they saw themselves. The medieval text known as Lebor Gabala Éireann, the Book of Invasion, tells of Ireland being settled in a series of waves. Among them were the Tuath de Danann, the tribe of goddess Danu, who arrived with great knowledge and power. Later came the Milesians, said to be the ancestors of the Irish people. These legends place the Celts within a cosmic history, guided by divine ancestors and mythical battles. Their pantheon was diverse, but shared common themes. Tyrannus was the thunder god, often shown with a wheel and lightning, a sky father figure. Lu was warrior and a solar deity, was famed for his spear and skill in many arts. Cernunnos, the horn god, is depicted seated in a meditative posture, surrounded by animals, a figure of fertility and balance. These gods reflect natural forces, cosmic order, and the cycles of life. The landscape itself was sacred. Celts worshipped in oak groves, at rivers, at spring. They saw forests, hills, and waters as dwelling places for the spirits and gods. Nature was not separate from religion. It was the temple. And above all was there a vision of the afterlife. The Celts believed in the other world, a realm of God and ancestors, beyond mortal sight, accessible during certain festivals as Samhain. Julius Caesar wrote that the Druids taught the immortality of the soul and even the doctrine of rebirth to the Celts. Death was not an end, but a passage into another cycle. These myths, gods, and beliefs gave the Celts a spiritual framework, one that explained origin, sanctified the landscape, and promised continuity beyond death. But now, if you have been paying close attention, you might notice something astonishing. If you have even a slight knowledge of Vedic and Hindu scriptures, you might feel as though you are hearing the same story with different names. And if not, what you're about to see next will truly blow your mind. The first similarity between the Celts and Vedic world begins with a mother figure, the goddess Danu. In Irish myth, she is remembered as the mother of the Tuatha Dé Danann, a divine race who brought wisdom and power to Ireland. In India, the name appears in the Rig Veda, where Danu is described as the mothers of Varta, the serpent who held back the waters. Later Puranic texts expand on her role. She is one of the daughters of Daksha, married to the sage Kashyap, and from this union were born the Danavas, a powerful clan of Asuras. Here the parallel is undeniable in both Ireland and India. Danu is a primal mother tied to water, and her children shape the fate of the world. In India, the Danavas are remembered as Asuras, locked in battles with the Devas. In Ireland, the Tuatha Dé Danann are remembered as divine ancestors, locked in battles with the Fomorians. Same mother, same theme of cosmic conflict, different memories. If we step back, one picture begins to emerge, a single name, Danu, stretching from the Rig Veda to Irish myth, carrying with it the memory of a forgotten migration. From myths, we turn to gods, and here too the similarities are striking. Among the Celts were the gods, Taranis, the thunder wielder. He is shown with a wheel and a thunderbolt, ruling the skies with storm and fire. In India, the Vedic god Indra holds the same place, master of storms, wielder of the Vajra, protector of his people. Both embody the same archetype, the storm god, whose lightning is both weapon and blessing. And then there is the enigmatic Cernunnos, the horn god of the Celts, seated cross-legged, surrounded by animals, a lord of fertility, nature, and hidden wealth. Some compare him to Shiva, but a closer parallel lies within the Yakshas of Indian tradition. The Yakshas were ancient nature spirits, guardians of forest, treasure, and fertility. They were kin to the Asuras, not fully divine, not fully demonic, beings who stood between humans, animals, and gods. In this liminal role, Cernunnos and the Yakshas reflect the same archetype, guardians of abundance, mediators of the wild. The symbols carved and carried by the Celts speak the same cosmic language. The swastika, sacred to sun, appears on Celtic jewelry and weapons, the same symbol venerated in Vedic temples as a mark of auspiciousness and solar power. The solar wheel, turned by Taranis, mirrors the Vedic chakra, the wheel of the sun's endless cycles. And the triskelion, three spiral flowing into one, recalls the Vedic vision of time as eternal motion, creation, preservation, and dissolution. Even in the death, the parallels endure. Celtic chieftains were buried with chariots, weapons, and ornaments, symbol of their journey into the next world. In the Rig Veda, the chariots are central, the vehicle of god and warriors, drawn by horses across earth and sky. Two cultures far apart, yet both saw the chariot as not just transport, but a sacred symbol of power and passage. Beyond gods and symbols, the Celts and the Vedic people shared ideas about life, death, and what lies beyond. Roman writers were astonished by the Celts' belief in the immortality of the soul. Julius Caesar wrote that Druids taught the doctrine of rebirth, that after death, the soul passes into another body. Strabo, the Greek geographer, compared them to India's Brahmins, noting their devotion to philosophy, rituals, and astronomy. These are not vague similarities. They are direct observations from antiquity, linking Druids to India's priestly sages by civilizations that came after them. In Ireland, the other world was a central belief, a realm of gods and ancestors, entered at sacred times like Samhain, when the veil between worlds was thin. It was not a place of final judgment, but of continuity, transformation, and return. In India, the Upanishads describe the soul's journey through cycle of birth and death, samsara, and the quest for liberation beyond it. Both traditions saw life not as an ending, but as an eternal cycle. Even their rituals reflect this vision. The Celts marked time through fire festivals, death and rebirth of seasons, decay followed by renewal. The Vedic world lit sacred fire for sacrifice, believing each ritual fed the eternal order, Ratha, the cosmic cycle of truth. Fire for both cultures was more than flame. It was the bridge between different worlds. Taken together, these beliefs reveal a philosophy far older than any empire. A vision where the soul is eternal, where nature moves in cycle, where death is not end but a passage. Whether in Ireland or in India, the pattern is the same. A worldview rooted in continuity, transformation, and cosmic order. The structure of the Celtic society reveals another parallel with the Vedic world. At the top were the Druids, custodians of law, ritual, and philosophy. Roman writers noted that their training could take 20 years, preserved entirely through memory. Below them were the warriors, forming a noble class, and beneath them stood the farmers, herders, and artisans. This threefold division mirrors the Vedic Varna system. The Brahmins as priests and philosophers, the Kshatriyas as warriors and rulers, the Vaishyas as farmers and producers. Both cultures placed spiritual authority first, military strength second, and the economic producers as the foundation. A social order built not just on power, but on duty, each group holding its role in maintaining balance. When we place this alongside the myths, symbols, and philosophy, the Celtic world began to look like an isolated culture, more like a branch of much older tradition. Which brings us to the great debate. Did these similarities arise from a common origin or from a migration that carried the wisdom of the Vedas westwards? To answer this, we must turn to the story of Indo-European migration, the Battle of 10 Kings, and the questions at the heart of history. Did the Vedas travel out of India or came into it? So how do we explain the similarities? The mainstream answer is the Arya invasion theory, that Indo-European speakers spread out of Eurasian steppe around 2000 BC, some moving west into Europe, other east into India. The alternative is the out of India theory, which holds that Sanskrit and the Vedic culture were the source, spreading westward into Europe. Entire playlist of mine dives into this debate. The DNA, the archaeology, the text. If you want details, check the card above. But here, let's stay with what's most relevant to the Celts. First, the DNA question. Much of the AIT is argued on the basis of ancient DNA samples showing steppe ancestry, R1A1 gene. But here's the key problem. India's climate has destroyed almost all human remains before 1500 BC. We do not have any ancient DNA from Indus-Saraswati civilization that belongs to a male, meaning there is no way to prove or disprove AIT or OIT through genetics alone. Without that, the missing link, the debate remains open. Second, the textual evidence of migration. The Rig Veda records the famous Battle of 10 Kings, the Dashrajanya Yuddha. It was fought along the river Parushni, the modern Ravi. On one side was Sudas of the Bharata clan, the very clan after which our land came to be called Bharat. On the other side stood a coalition of rival tribes, the Druyus, Paktas, Bhrigus, Alinas, Anus, and others. Sudas emerged victorious, but his enemies were crushed and scattered. Many were forced to flee, some moving eastward deeper into the subcontinent, and others moving westwards out of India towards Iran and beyond. These exiled clans carried their tradition across generations. It could explain that why similarity of Vedic memory resurfaces in Europe even as far as Ireland. And finally, the Celtic connection itself. When we see Danu in both India and Ireland, when we find chariots buried in Celtic graves, when Druids teach rebirths like Upanishads, the parallels may not be coincidence. They fit into a bigger picture of an ancient dispersal. Whether you call it Aryan, Indo-European, or out of India, the Celts in that view are not isolated mystery, but distant cousins of the Vedic people, carrying fragments of the shared origin into the far west of Europe. By now, the parallels are clear, but let us bring them together through a few striking connections. In the Ramayana, Sugriv sends his warrior westward in search of Mata Sita. He describes the farthest land, beyond which lies only endless ocean. For ancient Indians, this was the western edge of the world, pointing towards Europe itself. In the same direction, exiled tribes from the Battle of Ten Kings would have wandered, carrying their gods, their rituals, and their memory. On the hill of Tara in Ireland, kings were crowned at the Leal Foel, the stone of destiny. Its upright form has long been compared to the Shivlingam of India. Was this coincidence or a distant memory of cultic stones carried west by migrating clans? In Indian tradition, the Danavas, children of Danu and Kashyap, were often linked to Shiva. They revered him, even as they sometimes stood apart from the Devas. If Druyus or the other clans tied to Danu carried that worship westward, the stone cult at Tara may be the remnant of that connection. The very name Tara deepens this link. In India, Tara is remembered as both as goddess and a form of Shakti, often associated with Shiva in Tantric tradition. To find Ireland's sacred hill of kingship bearing the same name is more than a coincidence. If Danu's descendants migrated west, the devotion to Shiva and Shakti could have survived not as a figure, but as place, names, and sacred symbols in Ireland. Tara became the seat of kingship. In India, Tara remained one of the greatest goddesses. Two expressions of the same memory diverged into distant times. And this also explains that why we do not see an image of Shiva in Celtic myths. The Danavas were never central to the Vedic pantheon. Often they stood apart, estranged, even in conflict. Their reverence for Shiva may have continued in symbols, the stone, the name, the ritual posture, while the full figure of Shiva himself faded from Celtic memory. Finally, the rituals of kingship themselves. At Tara, Celtic kingship was sanctified by standing upon a stone, a covenant between ruler and land. In India, Rajsuya crowned kings through vows, offering, and cosmic alignment. Both saw sovereignty as divine legitimacy, rooted in rituals and sacred landscape. So far, we have stayed close to archaeology, text, and comparative myths. But this subject has also inspired a wave of alternative theories, some intriguing, some far-fetched, but all worth noting. Writers like Graham Hancock have argued that both the Celts and the Vedic Indians may be heir of much older, law civilization, a prehistoric culture that spread its astronomical knowledge, sacred geometry, and myths of floods and rebirth. In this view, sites like Newgrange and the Rig Veda's cosmic hymns are not separate inventions, but resemblance of a forgotten global memory. Others, like Berryfell, claim that the ancient inscription in Europe and even America show traces of Sanskrit and Ogham together, suggesting deep contact that mainstream historians miss. These claims are controversial, but they continue to fuel debate. In fringe circles, the Irish Tuatha De Danann are often said to be none other than India's Danavas, the tribes that migrated west. For believers, the goddess Danu is the clearest link, preserved in both traditions across oceans and centuries. Some even connect this to Atlantis, imagining a legendary lost land was actually not in the Atlantic, but in the East, with survivors carrying the culture into both India and Europe. These theories are speculative and often rejected by academics, but they show just how many people sense that the Celts and the Vedic world are not distant as history books suggest. Our role here is not to endorse every claim, but to recognize that these questions remain alive because the evidence from the myths to symbols to migration continue to point towards deep, unexplained connections. So, after everything that we have seen, the myths, the gods, the symbols, the stones, the battles, what do we make of it? I'll be clear. I somehow believe in out of India theory. The evidence, when you look at honestly, points again and again to the movement westward from India and not the other way around. Well, archaeology and history books back this up. The Mitanni Treaty in Syria 1400 BC invokes Indra, Mitra, Varuna, and Ashwins. The Meluhan traders of Mesopotamia came from the Indus-Saraswati civilization, and the drying up of Saraswati River would have displaced millions, pushing them outwards in every direction. The Celts may well be one of those displaced branches. And here's the point that critics never want to face. All of the Aryan invasion theory rests on one invention of something called Proto-Indo-European. But think about it. This is a language that was never written, never spoken, never found in inscriptions. This language is not real. It was reconstructed on paper by European linguistics, invented to explain why Sanskrit looks much older, richer, and more systematic than Latin or Greek. Because if they accept that Sanskrit was the language and it stood alone without the fiction of PIE, then it becomes undisputed the mother of all Indo-European languages. And if Sanskrit is the mother, then the Vedic civilization of India is the father of all cultures. Instead of accepting that India was the source, they built a phantom language, PIE, Proto-Indo-European, to balance the scale and shift it towards the Europeans. But there is no archaeology of PIE, no pottery, no inscriptions, no homeland ever discovered. It is the only so-called civilization that exists purely in textbooks, not in ground. In other words, it is a fabrication. And that is why out of India theory is sidelined. Not because it lacks evidence, but because admitting it would overturn the entire Eurocentric model of history. A model built during colonial times to place Europe at the center and India at the margin. Critics point to DNA and the step hypothesis, but here's the simple fact. India has no ancient DNA. The climate destroyed it. Without those samples, these genetics cannot prove invasion or migration. The case is incomplete until the missing evidence is found. And the debate, well, it remains open. Which means the text, the archaeology, and logic must be taken seriously. So when we see goddess Danu in both Ireland and Rigved, when we see druids teaching rebirth like the Upanishads, when we see chariots buried in Celtic graves like those of Rigvedic warriors, these are not coincidences. And calling them coincidences is not scholarship. Coincidence is ignorance. Coincidence is laziness. This is a connection. My take is simple. The Celts and the Vedic Indians were two accents of one ancestral civilization. One voice carried east, the other carried west. And through time and distance, changed their myths. The root is the same. If we strip away colonial fictions, what remains is this. India's Vedic civilization was not just India's. It was the seed of cultures across the world. I think it is time that we own our past and not rent it from colonizers. And if you want to dive deep into the great debate of AIT versus OIT, I have covered it in detail. Check out the playlist. This is it from my side. This is Harry signing off. Stay curious.